In the crisp autumn of 1991, a quiet suburb in Portland, Oregon, was rattled by a nightmare no parent should ever face: the unexplained disappearance of 5-year-old Isabel "Izzy" R.H. She had gone to bed like any other night, but by morning her room was empty, her bed untouched, and the bedroom window flung open to the chill of October. Her mother, Elaine, had returned from an overnight shift at the hospital, expecting the sleepy warmth of her daughter's hug. Instead, she walked into silence that would echo through her life for the next 9 years. The authorities launched an aggressive search effort. Helicopters buzzed overhead, police dogs combed the nearby woods, and volunteers turned out in droves. But it was as if Izzy had vanished into thin air. The trail grew cold, and so did the hope. Until a decade later, when Elaine stumbled upon a long-forgotten recording toy while packing her things to move out of the home that had once been a family sanctuary and now stood as a monument to heartbreak. Elaine stood inside what used to be her house, the place that had once been full of life, now quiet and hollow. Most of the furniture remained, but the energy, the laughter, the memories felt like they had been boxed up long before she started taping shut the cardboard. This home now belonged to Charles, her ex-husband, and that reality weighed heavily on her. He worked beside her, silently and steadily, his movements still precise like they had been when he was building furniture for Izzy's nursery. 15 years of marriage had given them a rhythm, a kind of unspoken understanding that even divorce hadn't erased. "This one's ready," she said, nudging a box filled with old nursing uniforms and worn medical books. Charles hoisted it with Izzy's carpenter strength, still intact at foot. "I'll take this one out," he said, disappearing through the front door, leaving her alone with memories that refused to be packed away. She tried not to think of the house as a graveyard of what once was, but every corner whispered of their daughter. They had tried to save their marriage after Izzy's disappearance, clinging to each other in different ways. Charles buried himself in his workshop and leaned heavily on therapy, while Elaine drowned in the relentless pace of hospital shifts. The silence between them grew louder with each passing month. At first, the cracks showed in small ways: petty arguments over groceries or utilities. But beneath the surface churned a storm of guilt, blame, and the unbearable weight of uncertainty. 6 months ago, they had finally faced what they'd known for years. Love alone couldn't bring their little girl back, and staying together was only deepening the wound. The June sun beat down gently as Charles returned, his forehead glistening with sweat from lifting boxes into her modest Honda Civic. "That's most of them," he said. "Just a few more to go." Elaine nodded, then said softly, "I want to see her room ... one last time." Charles's face softened, his usual stoicism giving way to shared grief. "Of course," he murmured, stepping aside to let her go. Elaine climbed the staircase slowly, trailing her fingers along the wooden banister that Charles had built with his own hands before Izzy was born. Each groan of the old floorboards echoed like a memory. She paused at the doorway, then turned. The knob. Izzy's room remained frozen in time. The walls were still painted soft pink, adorned with fading hand-painted butterflies. Her white dresser was still covered in puffy stickers, and her My Little Pony comforter lay neatly atop the small bed, untouched for nearly a decade. The only difference was the window, now reinforced with locks and security bars that came far too late. Elaine remembered every detail of that night with painful clarity. She'd come home after a double shift, slipping into the house quietly to avoid waking anyone. Charles had been fast asleep. Out of habit, she had checked on Izzy, only to find the bed empty, the curtains swaying in the cold breeze, and the room silent. The panic had set in instantly, followed by the crushing reality that would reshape their lives forever. The police response had been immediate and thorough at first. Search dogs had sniffed through the nearby woods, helicopters circled overhead, and local news stations ran Izzy's picture non-stop. But no one found anything. No signs of a struggle. No fingerprints. No leads. It was as if her daughter had been erased. The FBI had stepped in briefly, but without evidence of a federal crime. They'd soon pulled back, leaving local authorities with an unsolvable mystery. The case was never officially closed, but the phone stopped ringing, and the mail stopped bringing updates. Elaine slowly approached the small wardrobe. On top sat a silver-framed photo of Izzy, her toothy smile shining out beneath a shock of dark curls, wearing her favorite striped shirt and denim overalls. Elaine kissed her fingers and pressed them to the glass. "Goodbye, baby girl," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. When she returned to the driveway, Charles stood waiting, the last of the boxes packed into the car. They faced each other in a silence filled with more emotion than words could hold. To people who had once dreamed of growing old together, now preparing to live separate lives. "You gonna be all right?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Elaine gave him a tired smile. "I'll manage. We both will." She climbed into the driver's seat, rolling down the window as Charles leaned in one last time. "You sure you want to take all this? Your apartment's not exactly roomy." Elaine shook her head. "If I run out of space, I'll get a storage unit. It's fine. I need to take it all." She didn't say it aloud, but she wasn't just ticking boxes. She was carrying what was left of a life, of a family, of a little girl lost to the night. She paused, softening her voice as she looked at him one last time. "Take care of yourself, Charles. We'll see each other around," he replied, giving her a small nod. "Yeah," she said, trying to believe it. He stepped back slowly. "Drive safe." The 15-minute drive to her new apartment felt longer than it was, like crossing an invisible border between the life she once had and the one she was being forced to rebuild. The building was an aging but tidy complex just a few blocks from the hospital. Practical choice for someone working back-to-back night shifts. Elaine had rented a modest two-bedroom on the second floor, one room for sleeping, the other to hold the overflow of a life too full of memories. Moving in was exhausting. The building's worn-out wheeled cart saved her some strain, but the endless trips up and down the stairs chipped away at her energy. A few neighbors peeked through cracked doors or glanced from behind curtains, but no one offered help, not that she wanted it. Elaine wasn't ready for conversations or new faces. By sundown, her living room was a maze of cardboard towers, each one holding fragments of a life that no longer fit neatly into any one place. She collapsed onto her thrifted couch, bones aching and hands raw. She knew she should start with the essential scrubs for work. Toothbrush, maybe a pan or two, but her eyes kept drifting to the box marked Izzy's favorites. After a few minutes of resistance, she pulled it closer, lifting the flaps with trembling fingers. Charles had packed this one, as she'd asked, carefully choosing the items their daughter had loved the most. On top was a soft purple owl, its felt wings slightly frayed from years of hugs. Nestled beside it were her favorite unicorn plush and a tiny zoo of beloved stuffed animals, still smelling faintly of Johnson's baby shampoo and graham crackers. Beneath them lay folded pajamas and dresses, little fabric memories preserved in cotton and scent. Then, at the bottom, she found it, a red and white cassette recorder, not the shiny Fisher-Price model Izzy had circled in the catalog for her 5th birthday, but the cheaper off-brand version they'd picked up from Toys Plus. That year, the water heater had started leaking, and finances had forced a compromise. Elaine picked up the recorder, surprised by its weight. She opened the battery compartment and winced, corroded. Old batteries had leaked, leaving a chalky mess. Still, her fingers moved with precision, wiping the contacts clean and replacing them with fresh AA's from her junk drawer. She hesitated, then pressed play. A hiss of static, then a small, crackling voice filled the room. "Testing, testing. This is Isabella Marie Rhodes, and I'm 5 years old." Elaine's breath caught. Her daughter's voice, sweet, clear, and heartbreakingly young, filled the space like sunlight through a dusty window. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks as she listened to Izzy talk about her day at preschool, her best friend named Lucy, the butterfly she saw in the garden. Then came a shift. The background grew noisier, and a man's voice, Charles's, emerged. "Izzy, come to the princess room when you're done. Remember what I promised. Once we're finished, we'll go to Toys R Us for that new My Little Pony." Elaine's brow furrowed. Princess room. She rewound and listened again, her attention narrowing. Charles's tone was coaxing, almost overly sweet, and the phrase struck her as odd. Izzy hadn't been interested in princesses he'd loved. Dragons, unicorns, and anything with fur or scales. Was this just playful parenting, a little game? Bribing with a My Little Pony made sense, but the nickname for the room, that was new. Elaine searched through the box but saw no pony toys. Maybe they were in another box, or maybe Charles had left them out. Some things were too painful. Even now, she sat back, suddenly uneasy. The term princess room echoed in her thoughts like a phrase she should recognize but didn't. Charles had spent more time with Izzy during the day, and it wasn't uncommon for parents to invent little worlds and names for their children. Still, something about his voice on the tape, soft, too deliberate, gnawed at her instincts. She set the recorder down, her mind turning, and began unpacking her own things, trying to focus on the present. Dishes found their way into unfamiliar cabinets, clothes filled a smaller closet. Family photos were carefully placed in new spots. She felt like she was rearranging someone else's life. Then, while organizing paperwork in her filing cabinet, she froze. Her nursing license renewal documents were gone. She rifled through folders again, more urgently this time. Her name was on every box, every folder checked, but still nothing. Panic started to simmer. The time read 8:30 in the evening. Shift started at 10. Without that paperwork, she couldn't legally clock in. Her hospital was notoriously strict about credentials, and being turned away on her first day back would look bad. She grabbed her phone and dialed Charles. He answered on the third ring. "Elaine, everything okay? I can't find my nursing license papers," she said, already on her feet. "I think I left them at the house. Would it be all right if I came by to look?" Elaine asked, her voice trying to sound casual, though urgency crept in. "Oh," Charles replied, followed by a pause. "I just left for my grief group Tuesday session. I won't be back until late." Elaine glanced outside. The sun had nearly dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in streaks of orange and dusty rose. "I really need those documents for my shift tonight. Could I use my key?" "Of course," he said, without hesitation. "You know where everything is. Just lock up when you leave." "Thanks, I appreciate it." "No problem. Good luck tonight." Elaine ended the call and grabbed her keys. The house key felt heavier now, not in weight but in memory. It was one of the last physical connections to a life she no longer lived. She made a mental note to return it soon. Without bothering to organize the half-unpacked boxes in her apartment, she headed for the car. 15 minutes later, she was back in the driveway of the house that had once been her home. It stood in the fading light like a ghost of its former self, still, dark, unfamiliar. The windows reflected the last burn of sunset, and for a moment, she stood there, hand on the car door, struck by how quickly familiarity could turn into distance. She stepped inside, flipping on lights as she moved through the rooms. Everything was as she'd left it earlier that day, but the silence now felt deeper, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The hallway stretched ahead, and at the end stood the bedroom that now belonged to Charles alone. She pushed the door open. The queen-size bed looked oddly incomplete, with only one pillow. Her jewelry dish was gone from the dresser. The nightstand, once cluttered with her books and hand lotion, sat bare. He had cleared out all traces of her. In the corner, the old metal filing cabinet stood untouched. Elaine opened the second drawer, and found the manila folder labeled medical licenses. There it was, her renewal, paperwork, continuing education credits, everything she needed. Relief flooded her chest. This one part of her life, at least, could still function. As she tucked the folder under her arm and turned to leave, a memory played back on Bidnaizi's voice from the cassette recorder. "Princess room." It didn't fit. The phrase tugged at her like an itch beneath the skin. Almost without thinking, Elaine turned and made her way upstairs, her feet finding the old rhythm as they had hundreds of times before. The door to Izzy's room gave a familiar creak as it opened. Now emptied of most of its toys and clothes, the room looked more like a shell. She moved slowly around the space, eyes scanning the walls, hands brushing along paint and molding, looking for anything at all that matched the phrase. There was nothing. No tiaras, no princess-themed wallpaper or decor. Izzy hadn't even liked fairy tales. She opened the closet. Empty hangers swayed gently from her motion, clinking together like wind chimes. Then her gaze shifted to the wardrobe along the far wall, an antique Charles had insisted on keeping. When she stepped closer, the tall wooden cabinet tilted slightly toward her. With its contents gone, the structural imbalance was noticeable. The left front foot didn't touch the floor properly. Elaine knelt to inspect it and saw how the floorboards beneath had warped. Years of humidity, an old house, a closed-up room, it all added up. She gripped the edge of the wardrobe to stabilize it. The whole thing wobbled dangerously. One strong nudge could topple it. If Charles came in here and saw it leaning like that, he might think someone had broken in. She glanced at her watch. 7:30. Harrison's Hardware stayed open until 8. If she hurried, she could grab a couple of wooden shims and get the wardrobe level before heading to work. She made her way downstairs quickly, mentally planning the fix. Then, just as she reached for her purse, the phone rang. The sharp sound cut through the quiet like a blade. She hesitated. Her hand hovered over the receiver. This wasn't her house anymore. The calls weren't hers to answer. She stepped back, letting it ring. After a few more rings, the answering machine clicked on. Charles's voice came through warm, rehearsed. "You've reached the Rhodes residence. Please leave a message." Then a woman's voice, calm but insistent. "Charles, this is Mrs. Jansen from Group I. Need you to call me back as soon as possible. We need to discuss your attendance and participation. You've missed 3 sessions now. That's 3 weeks, Charles. The group is concerned. Please call me." Elaine froze. 3 weeks. Her mind reeled. But Charles had just told her he'd left for therapy. For the past 5 years, he had attended his grief support group every Tuesday night, religiously. He never missed. And yet, here was his group facilitator saying he hadn't shown up in nearly a month. The voice on the machine didn't just raise questions, it shattered something. Charles had lied. But why? And what was he really doing every Tuesday night? It had been one of the few constants after Izzy vanished grief group on Tuesdays, led by Mrs. Jansen, a gentle nonsense therapist who specialized in parental loss. She had become a lifeline in those early days when everything felt like it was unraveling. Elaine had attended the group for 2 years before the emotional weight became too much. But Charles had stayed. Week after week, he'd gone, always saying it helped him process everything. So why lie now? Where had he really been going every Tuesday night? Elaine's fingers twitched to call Mrs. Jansen, to get the truth straight from the source, but that would cross a line. Charles was no longer her responsibility. Still, concern gnawed at her. Divorce hadn't dissolved their promise to support one another, to remain a team in the ways that still mattered. Locking up the house, Elaine walked toward her car. The air had cooled, carrying with it the scent of pine and the quiet heaviness of distant rain. Her Honda still had an old built-in car phone, an expensive relic from the previous owner that she'd kept for emergencies. This felt close enough. She slid into the seat, picked up the chunky handset, and dialed Charles's number. Streetlights blinked on above her, casting yellow halos over the calm, tree-lined road. This neighborhood had once been their dream-safe, green, close to good schools. Now, it was just another address haunted by Izzy's absence. The phone rang once, then twice, then a third time. Elaine was about to hang up when Charles answered. "Hello." His voice was tight, breathless. "Charles, it's me," she said, keeping her tone light. "Just checking in. Are you at therapy?" A long pause followed, filled with static and hesitation. "Yes, I mean, no, but I'm on the way there," he said quickly, the words tumbling over each other. "I went to pick up Matthew. He lives out past Gresham, so we're running a little behind, but we're heading to the session together. I'll just be about 15 minutes late." "Why?" Elaine's stomach twisted. His voice had the telltale edge she recognized from years of little lies, flimsy explanations meant to smooth things over. "I didn't mean to pry," she said carefully. "It's just, while I was at the house, the phone rang. It went to voicemail. Mrs. Jansen left a message." "All right," Charles laughed, but it was thin and mechanical. "Yeah, she's not thrilled when people are late. I've been late a few times recently." Maybe she wanted to talk about that. But Elaine wasn't convinced. Late wasn't the same as absent for 3 weeks. Something wasn't adding up. "What did she say?" Charles asked, too casually. Elaine hesitated. Part of her wanted to lay it out, bluntly, to call out the lie and demand the truth, but what good would that do now? They weren't married anymore. "Nothing specific," she said. "Just asked you to call her back." "Right, okay. Well, I should get going. Matthew's waiting." "Sure. Drive safe. You too. Bye." The line clicked dead. Elaine stared at the receiver, heart pounding, her gut screaming that something was off. In 15 years of marriage, she'd learned to read Charles like a book, and he was lying. That much was clear. About what? She wasn't sure. But the feeling wouldn't let go. She started the car and drove toward Harrison's Hardware. Only 5 minutes away, it was one of the last family-run shops in town, holding strong even as big box stores popped up nearby. Inside, the familiar bell chimed above the door. George Harrison, the owner's son, looked up from the register and smiled. "Elaine, good to see you." How's everything? Fine, thanks. I just need some shims for a wobbly wardrobe, she replied. Aisle 3, halfway down, he said, then turned to ring up another customer. As Elaine found her item, George called out, "Hey, how's Charles's renovation project coming along? Does he need an extra set of hands? I've got some free time this weekend." Elaine stopped mid-step. "Renovation?" she asked, turning. "Slowly, yeah, the hobby room he's building. He was in here just last weekend," George said. "Bought a ton of stuff, plywood, paint, even a new jigsaw. Said he was finally putting that old plan into motion." Elaine blinked. "You must be mistaken," she said carefully. "There's no renovation, at least, not that I know of." George looked genuinely puzzled. "I'm pretty sure it was him. Charles Rhodes. Big guy, carpenter's hands, talks about his daughter a lot. He said he was converting a space in the house for a hobby room, finally, making time for himself." Elaine nodded slowly, her mind racing. Charles had mentioned a hobby room years ago, back when Izzy still bounced around in pigtails and called their garage Daddy's castle. But he'd never brought it up again, not even once during their divorce. And he certainly hadn't said anything about renovations when she'd been in the house just hours earlier. So what was he building? And more importantly, why had he kept it from her? But after Izzy disappeared, Charles had abandoned his tools, his sketches, even the half-finished figurines gathering dust in the garage. The man who once breathed life into blocks of wood with tenderness and care had vanished. So a sudden return, two hobbies, after years of silence, struck Elaine as strange. Still, she forced a polite smile. "Well," she said to George, "I'll ask him about it. Thanks for the information." "No problem. Shims are right where I said." Elaine found the small pack of leveling shims quickly, paid in cash, and headed back to her car. The plastic hardware store bag crinkled as she tossed it onto the passenger seat. Her thoughts, however, were anything but tidy. A secret renovation, 3 weeks of missed therapy, lies about his whereabouts, none of it fit together. But people changed, she reminded herself. Maybe the divorce had shaken something loose in Charles, triggered a retreat into old comforts. Perhaps he was ashamed of abandoning group therapy, afraid she'd judge him. Grief didn't run in straight lines. It bent, twisted, and reshaped people in quiet ways. She checked the time, 8:05 p.m. If she moved quickly, she could still level the wardrobe and make it to her shift. But the night had taken on a dreamlike quality, as if she was slipping between versions of her life then and now, familiar and foreign. That morning, she had still felt tethered to this neighborhood, her name etched invisibly into every corner. Now, she was a stranger, discovering hidden layers in the very house she once helped build. She turned the key in the ignition, unaware that each mile back was taking her deeper into a truth she wasn't ready for. Elaine pulled into Charles's driveway for the second time that evening, clutching her purse and the hardware bag. She planned to fix the wardrobe quickly, maybe text Charles a heads up, and leave before her shift began. George's words about the hobby room echoed in her mind. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe Charles really had picked up his old tools again, trying to piece himself back together. She remembered the way he used to spend hours carving miniature owls and foxes, the way Izzy had once run around the living room clutching a hand-carved bear, giggling like she held treasure. Her key turned smoothly in the lock. The house sat dark except for the porch light she'd left earlier. She stepped inside and flipped on the hallway light. Everything seemed undisturbed just as she'd left it. Then, halfway up the stairs, she froze. Light poured from underneath Charles's office door. That wasn't right. She'd turned off every switch before leaving. "Charles," she called, heart beginning to race. "Are you home?" No reply, but she heard movement shuffling, the scrape of furniture, the unmistakable slam of a drawer. "Charles," she said again, her voice sharper. Still no answer. At the top of the stairs, the sounds grew louder. She approached the office door, cautiously, and pushed it open. "Charles, I thought you were." Her words died in her throat. Matthew Tenko stood in the middle of the ransacked office, breathing heavily. Papers were scattered across the floor like confetti. Desk drawers hung open, contents dumped without. Care books were overturned, binders torn apart. Elaine's breath caught. "Matthew," she said, stunned. What are you doing here?" "I thought you were with Charles." Matthew turned slowly to face her. Sweat clung to his pale skin, and his usually tidy hair stuck up in damp clumps. His eyes were wrong-wide, glassy. the pupils blown out like he'd stepped out of a nightmare. "Are you okay?" she asked carefully, though every instinct screamed that he wasn't. "You look sick." He took a step toward her, swaying slightly. The stench hit her, then a foul mix of whiskey, sweat, and something darker, something chemical. "What are you doing here?" she asked again, trying to stay calm. "Did Charles ask you to find something?" But Matthew didn't answer. His face was blank, eerily detached, and he moved again, closer this time. "Matthew, stay back," Elaine warned, her voice trembling but firm. "You need help. I'll call a medic." She reached for the office phone, but he lunged. His hands clamped around her wrists with bruising force. "Let go," she shouted, struggling to break free. "You're hurting me." She shoved him with all her strength. His grip loosened and she stumbled backward, slamming the office door as hard as she could. But Matthew caught it mid-swing and yanked it open with a growl. Terror flooded through her. This wasn't the gentleman who used to bring Izzy wooden animals and help Charles build the backyard deck. This was someone else entirely. Elaine turned and ran, but he was faster. His arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her off the ground. She kicked and twisted, screaming, but he dragged her down the hall like a rag doll. "No, let me go," she cried, punching and clawing at him, but his grip only tightened. He shoved open the door to Izzy's old room and flung her onto the tiny bed. The pastel comforter did little to soften the blow. She scrambled to sit up, but he was on top of her, pinning her down. His breath was thick with whiskey. His hands clawed at her. "Matthew, please," Elaine sobbed, pushing at his chest, twisting to escape. "Don't do this." But there was no recognition in his eyes, only something unhinged, something broken far beyond what she understood. "Ma'am," the officer repeated, stepping fully into the room. His eyes swept over the scene, the splintered wardrobe, the shattered ceramic nightlight, the gaping hole in the floor with boxes exposed. "Are you hurt?" Elaine nodded numbly. Still clutching one of the tapes, "He attacked me. Matthew Tenko, he was looking for these." The officer knelt beside her, his tone shifting to something gentler. "Are you able to stand?" She let him help her up, wincing as her back protested. Her hands trembled uncontrollably now, the adrenaline beginning to ebb, leaving behind raw nerves and pain. He ran. He took some of the tapes. The officer exchanged a quick look with his partner, who entered with a flashlight and gloves. "We'll get a bolo out on him. Ambulance is on its way too, just in case." "Are you sure he didn't have a weapon?" "No, just his hands." "But he was." She searched for the right word. "Wrong, like he wasn't fully here." The officer gently took the cassette from her. "What's this?" Elaine hesitated. "I don't know. They're all labeled the same. Princess Room, volume numbers. My daughter had a tape recorder, one of these had that label too. I thought it was just her playing. Now I don't know." The partner whistled low as he examined the stash inside the floor. "There's hundreds of these." The first officer's brow furrowed. "And this was hidden under the wardrobe?" Elaine nodded. "It only collapsed because he threw me into it. I didn't even know there was anything under there." The officer crouched, studying the hole more closely, then spoke into his radio. "We're gonna need a forensics team at 4728 Elm, possibly a major evidence recovery. Potential media sensitive." Elaine's voice broke. "I don't understand what any of this is." The officer placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "You did the right thing, calling us. We're going to figure this out. First, we need to make sure you're okay. Then we'll start cataloging all of this." Elaine glanced at the nearest box again. The label was the same, but now it stared back like a riddle wrapped in fear. "Princess Room, volume 47 in." She shivered. For the first time it occurred to her that the room she stood in, the one that had once belonged to her daughter, was the princess room. And maybe, just maybe, those tapes had never been pretend at all. Detective Morrison slowly ejected the disc, placing it carefully into an evidence bag. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tight. Around him, the room had fallen into stunned silence, officers standing frozen, eyes averted out of respect, or perhaps horror. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Rhodes," Morrison said gently, crouching in front of her. "You didn't know. You couldn't have." Elaine shook her head, tears streaking down her cheeks, unable to speak. The truth, the grotesque, unbearable truth, had clawed its way into the light. And now it was sitting in her living room, waiting to be catalogued, analyzed, and used in court. Morrison rose and turned to one of his officers. Get SVU and digital forensics here now. We need every tape bagged, catalogued, and secured. No one leaves this house without gloves. Understood? Yes, sir. Another officer stepped forward with a notepad. We contacted the therapy center. Sir Charles never signed in tonight. No one named Mrs. Johnson works there. Morrison gave a grim nod. Send out a statewide bolo for Charles Rhodes. Consider him armed and dangerous. And get an alert to border control. He may try to run. Elaine clutched a throw pillow, trying to breathe. He recorded everything, she whispered. All those tapes, years of it. We'll know soon. Morrison replied. It's going to take time to process everything. Her voice shook. Izzy, if these go back far enough, maybe, we'll find out, he promised. And if there's any sign at all that your daughter might still be alive, we'll follow it. Elaine wiped her face and looked around the room that had once been her home. Now, it was a crime scene, a vault of horrors. I need to know, she said softly. No matter how bad it is, I have to know what happened to my little girl. Morrison nodded. And we'll find out. I give you my word. The officers began methodically cataloguing the tapes, photographing every box. Outside, more squad cars arrived. Inside, the truth continued to unspool one tape at a time. Morrison stepped closer to the exposed section of wall. That panel, it's not original, he said, running his fingers along the faint seam that framed a nearly invisible square. See here, different paint, slightly raised edges. This is it. One officer tapped it with a knuckle. It gave a hollow sound. Breaching tools. Now, Morrison ordered. Elaine stepped back again, clutching the banister, her breath shallow. The thought of what might lie behind that wall, who might lie behind it, was too much to fully process. An officer wedged a crowbar into the seam and began to pry. The false panel gave a soft groan, then popped loose, swinging inward on hidden hinges. A waft of stale, damp air poured out, cold and laced with something else, something human and rotten. Behind the panel was a narrow passage, just wide enough for a person to walk through sideways. At the end, a metal door with a keypad. Lock. Morrison turned to Elaine. Do you know the code? No, she whispered. He never let me near this part of the basement. I thought it was just a utility crawl space. Then we're cutting it open, Morrison said grimly. He turned to his team, torch and pry bars. Now, while officers prepared to breach the second door, another officer from upstairs appeared, pale-faced and shaken. Detective, he said quietly, you need to see this. What is it? Some of the later tapes. They show this same space, that door, and beyond it, there's a room, pink walls, a girl. Elaine's knees buckled. Izzy. We couldn't see her face clearly in the footage, but she was small and alive. In the last volume we watched, she was older, maybe 13. Morrison turned back to the sealed door. Cut it. Sparks flew as a cutting torch was applied to the metal frame. The noise was deafening. Elaine covered her ears, trembling from the inside out. Had her daughter really been just feet away for 9 years, living in silence, hidden behind concrete and lies? Finally, the hinges gave. The officers pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside, guns raised, flashlights slicing the darkness. The room was exactly as shown in the tape. Pink walls, faded from time. Stuffed animals sat in a row along one shelf. A child's mattress lay in the center. The air was cold and dead, and in the far corner, chained by one ankle to a steel ring the floor, was a girl. Thin, pale, hair tangled and long. She shielded her eyes from the sudden light. Hands where I can see them, one officer shouted, before realizing, why, it's a kid. Elaine pushed past Morrison and ran to the doorway. The girl turned, blinking at the light. Her eyes widened. Mummy, she said, her voice cracking from disuse. Elaine dropped to her knees. Izzy, and for the first time in 9 years, she wrapped her daughter in her arms. I'm here, she sobbed. I've got you. I've got you. Morrison knelt near the closet, his face hardening as he slowly slid the small door open. Inside were neatly folded clothes, some child-sized, some more recent. But beneath them were items no teenager should ever own: restraining straps, blind, and other objects so disturbing that the officers didn't speak. They simply stared, the weight of what had happened in this room pressing down like a physical force. He turned back to the team. Secure the evidence, bag everything. No detail gets overlooked. His voice was calm, but laced with fury. He was already building the case in his mind. Every horrific item, every hidden tape, every lock and lie would be turned into charges, each one another nail in Charles Rhodes's coffin. Elaine sat with Izzy on the mattress, stroking her hair as the girl cried into her shoulder, her sobs so deep they sounded primal. 9 years of isolation, of lies, of conditioning unraveled in mere minutes. The happy pink room, built to resemble safety, had been a prison disguised as love, a chamber of carefully curated manipulation. "I need medical in here now," Morrison called out, "and trauma counselors. She needs more than we can give her." Izzy looked up at her mother, eyes full of confusion and desperate need. "You won't go away this time," she whispered. "You're really here." Elaine cupped her daughter's face, tears still falling. "I will never leave you again, not ever." One of the officers returned with a paramedic team. They moved slowly, gently, letting Elaine explain who they were. Izzy flinched at first, but clung to her mother and allowed the responders to examine her. As they worked, Morrison stepped aside to take a call. "Go ahead," he said. "Detective," an officer replied from outside. "We've located Charles Rhodes's vehicle at a rest stop on I-5, about 30 minutes south. It's abandoned. No sign of him yet, but state troopers are canvassing the area. Notify the FBI. Tell them we're escalating this to federal charges, and get U.S. Marshals involved. We'll chase him across the country if we have to." He hung up and looked back toward the hidden room, the smiling princess, stickers, the faded walls, the broken girl now being led into safety. For Morrison, this wasn't just another case anymore. This was personal. As the team escorted Elaine and Izzy into the night air, a gentle rain began to fall, soft and cold, washing the driveway clean. Elaine looked up into the sky and whispered a thank you to whatever force had led her back to this place. For the first time in almost a decade, she wasn't wondering where her daughter was. She was holding her. And somewhere out there, Charles Rhodes was running out of time. Officer Chen pulled the cruiser to the curb, lights flashing silently as they arrived at a modest one-story house on Riverside Drive. The front yard was swarming with officers, crime scene techs, and 2 large black vans emblazoned with Portland PD Special Victims Unit. Elaine felt her stomach twist as she saw Charles, her husband, the man she had once trusted, being led in handcuffs toward one of the vans. His face was emotionless, but his eyes darted around nervously. Matthew Tenko followed, equally restrained but not hiding his fury. He was shouting something about freedom and the project. Izzy perked up at the sound of Matthew's voice. "Is that Uncle Matt?" she asked. Elaine didn't answer. Morrison opened the rear door of the patrol car and crouched beside it. "Mrs. Rhodes, you don't need to see this part. We can take you directly to the station." "No," Elaine said firmly. "I need to look him in the eyes." She stepped out slowly, keeping one arm wrapped protectively around Izzy as they approached the scene. Charles looked up just as they came into view. He stopped walking. "Elaine," he said, almost softly, as though this were a normal day and she were just back from work. "I did it for her. I kept her safe." Elaine's voice trembled, but her words were steady. "You stole her life. You broke her." Charles's face twisted in something between regret and defiance. "The world would have ruined her worse. I made her pure." Before anyone could react, Izzy stepped forward. "You said Mummy was dead." Charles looked at Hurley, and his posture changed. "Izzy, sweetheart, don't let them take you from me. They don't understand. We had something special." Izzy took a shaky breath. "You lied about everything." That moment seemed to stop time. Charles flinched as if she'd slapped him. And then, for the first time, Izzy turned her back on him and walked to Elaine. "Take him away," Morrison ordered. The officers didn't hesitate. Charles was shoved into the van, the door slamming shut behind him with a finality that felt like justice. Back in the patrol car, Elaine cradled Izzy as they drove toward the station. "I don't know how to be normal," Izzy whispered. "You don't have to be," Elaine said, brushing her fingers through her daughter's tangled hair. "You just have to be you, and we'll figure the rest out together." Behind them, the house on Riverside Drive stood silent, another layer of a terrible secret, finally exposed. But in the back seat of that patrol car, despite the pain and the long road ahead, something fragile but real was beginning again. Hope. Elaine held her daughter tightly as the patrol car pulled away from Riverside Drive, the glowing lights of the crime scene fading into the distance behind them. Izzy's head rested against her shoulder, her body still tense despite the warmth of her mother's embrace. The quiet inside the car was almost suffocating. No one spoke, not even Morrison. The weight of what had been uncovered, what had been endured, settled over them like a heavy fog. Elaine stared out the window, her hand still stroking Izzy's hair. Her mind reeled. Family sanctum fellowship, a club, a ring, organized, calculated, deliberate, and her ex-husband, the father of her child, the center of it. She didn't know what haunted her more, the fact that Charles had done this, or the fact that for 9 years she had lived above it in a way unseeing. Izzy stirred slightly. "Mummy, why do people hurt children?" Elaine felt her throat tighten. There was no simple answer, no explanation that could make the world make sense again for a child ripped from it so young. She kissed her daughter's head. "Because something inside them is broken, and instead of getting help, they break others too." Izzy nodded faintly, as if trying to accept that answer, even if she didn't understand it. "But you're not broken." "No," Elaine whispered. "I'm not, and neither are you." The car slowed as it neared the precinct. Bright lights lit up the station entrance, and Morrison finally spoke. "We'll take your statements then. The medics will do a full workup at the hospital. There's also a social services team waiting. They'll help with next steps, counseling, placement if needed." Elaine's voice was calm but firm. "Izzy's staying with me." Morrison nodded. "Of course, they'll just want to ensure she's safe, and that you have support." Elaine looked down at her daughter, this girl who had grown up in a prison of lies, yet still smiled, still clung to her mother like hope itself. There would be therapy, tears, trauma, but there would also be healing. She would not let her daughter be defined by what had been done to her. As they stepped into the station, Elaine felt the enormity of what lay ahead. Media coverage, investigations, testimony, courtrooms. But for the first time in 9 years, she wasn't walking through the dark alone. Izzy held her hand, and that was enough to begin. Morrison closed his notebook slowly, as if even the weight of paper was too much to bear in this moment. Elaine sat motionless, hands clenched in her lap. Her face was pale, eyes glazed somewhere between fury and disbelief. She whispered, "He talked about her like she was a product." "She was," Morrison said softly. To them, Elaine's breath caught in her throat. "I can't even imagine what's on those tapes." "And you don't have to," Morrison replied, firmly. "We'll spare you that. The DA will review the footage. A dedicated forensic team is cataloging every second. You won't have to see it unless absolutely necessary." Elaine nodded, but a single tear slipped down her cheek. "She'll have to live with it though. She's only 14. That's still a child." "I know," Morrison said, "but she's alive. You brought her back into the world, and now we'll help her reclaim it." A knock sounded on the door. Sarah Martinez stepped inside, her expression professional but kind. "She's resting," Sarah said. "I sat with her, asked some basic questions. She was nervous, but very open. She trusts you completely. That's more than most children in this situation have." Elaine stood. "Can I see her?" "Of course. She's just in the quiet room, down the hall." Elaine followed Sarah through the precinct, past bustling desks and tired officers. The quiet room had soft lighting, beanbag chairs, stuffed animals, and pastel walls. Izzy sat in the corner, wrapped in a blanket, flipping through a coloring book. Her long hair hung like a veil. "Mummy," she whispered when she saw Elaine. Elaine dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter close. "I'm here, baby. I'll always be here." Izzy clung to her, burying her face in her chest. "They asked me a lot of questions. They said Daddy's in big trouble." "He is," Elaine said gently, "but you're not. None of this is your fault." A long silence. Then, quietly, "Am I bad because I loved him?" Elaine's heart shattered all over again. "No, sweet girl. You're not bad. You were tricked, lied to. He made you think that was love. But real love keeps you safe. It never hurts you, and you didn't know any different." Izzy nodded slowly, tears finally spilling. "I wanted to believe him, but I think I always knew something wasn't right." Elaine kissed the top of her head. "That's your strength, Izzy. That tiny part of you that knew. That part saved you." They stayed like that for a long while, mother and daughter, together again in the aftermath of horror. Eventually, Morrison reappeared in the doorway. "We've arranged for a temporary housing unit, safe, private, and monitored by trauma-informed staff, but it's yours to share. And tomorrow, we'll begin building a longer-term plan." Elaine nodded, still holding Izzy tightly. We'll take it one step at a time. Morrison gave a faint smile. That's the only way to do it. As the night wore on, the station slowly quieted. The monsters had been unmasked. The files were logged, the statements given. But outside, the world was still turning. A world that had forgotten Izzy Rhodes, and now would have to remember, because she had survived, because she had returned, and because now she would begin again. The glow of the station lights bathed the sidewalk like a sanctuary beacon. Somewhere behind them, Charles and his associates were being processed, fingerprinted, catalogued, stripped of the lies that had shielded them for years. But for Elaine and Izzy, the real journey was only beginning. Matthew became obsessed, Morrison said quietly as they walked the corridor. He wanted Izzy for himself but couldn't find her, so he tried to steal the video archive. Didn't expect you to be there. He attacked me, Elaine whispered. He confessed, said, you reminded him of Izzy. Morrison's voice softened. Mrs. Rhodes, your daughter's going to need extensive therapy. 9 years of isolation, manipulation. There'll be deep wounds. She may seem okay on the surface, but she's alive, Elaine said, cutting gently. That's what matters. We have a chance now. They turned a corner and found Izzy waiting with Sarah Martinez. The girl saw her mother and ran. Mummy. Elaine caught her in a fierce embrace, her tears falling silently into Izzy's tangled hair. She was real, warm, breathing. The hospital team is ready when you are, Sarah said gently. In the quiet waiting room, Izzy curled into Elaine's side, small and trembling. Silence stretched between them. Then, softly, painfully, the officer told me what happened. That Dad lied about everything. That the world didn't end. That you weren't dead. Izzy looked up, her eyes shattered. Why did he do that to me? Elaine stroked her hair, steadying her voice through a storm of pain. I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes the people who should protect us are the ones who do the most harm. But none of it was your fault. But I loved him, Izzy whispered. Even when he told me I was saving the world. I thought I was doing something important. I feel so stupid. You're not stupid, Elaine said fiercely. You were a child. You trusted him. And he used that trust in the worst way. We'll get through this together. It won't be easy. But we're stronger than we know. They sat in the stillness, the murmur of the station around them growing quieter with every minute. Somewhere, Charles's world was ending. Theirs was just beginning. Need a new home, Elaine said softly. A place that's truly safe. You'll go to school, make friends, have the life you deserved all along. Izzy hesitated. Will people hate me? Will it hurt? Moving on. Elaine hugged her close. Some days will be hard, but time helps. Talking helps. Love helps. You'll make new memories that don't hurt when you look at them. And as for people, no one needs to know everything. You get to choose who you trust. Who deserves to know your story? An officer stepped into the doorway. Ma'am, the escort to the hospital is ready. Elaine stood, still holding Izzy's hand, as they walked through the station one step at a time through glass doors and into the waiting night. Elaine thought about what lay ahead. Therapy sessions, courtroom testimony, years of rebuilding what had been taken. But they would do it together. I'm scared. Mom, Izzy whispered. Me, too, Elaine replied. Then she smiled, through the ache. But we're together now, and together, we can face anything. They stepped into the darkness, toward the waiting car, toward healing, toward a future they would build one day, one brave moment at a time.